The Bank of Canada cuts rates as expected. Doug Ford apologizes and heads to the U.S. to negotiate. Australia takes a more measured approach to tariffs. Mark Carney expected to be sworn in on Friday. And BC says they'll take advantage of the U.S. turmoil to attract healthcare workers. And Greenland has a new government. All that and more on The Really Big Show with myself, Jim Check of Kelowna Now, and Ian Burns of Kelowna Now. He's in Ottawa, and we're right here in Kelowna, all kind of like sopped in today, like the cloud cover is nice and warm out there, actually, but lots of cloud cover this morning in Kelowna. You can see in our live shot there, and traffic flowing well. How are things looking out there in Ottawa?
Not so pretty. It was 10 degrees yesterday, and today it's -10. So just another crazy day in the city.
There you go, -10, eh? You gotta love it, eh? Living in the land of the government, right? Ottawa, our nation's capital. We're gonna
It's
try.
beautiful in the summer, but yeah, that's about it.
In this show, we try to like make sure that you learn something too. We're not really just parroting messages. We're going to try and like do some learning. We're also going to blend in some health topics every now and then, and some finance topics, and hopefully you learn something from watching The Really Big Show. That's our goal. We try to take a more pluralist approach. We definitely want to hold power accountable. That's kind of our approach. There you go. So with that said, let's kick it off with Bank of Canada cuts rates once again. So that's 7 straight cuts now, right?
Yeah, and it's always predictable. Everybody always seems to know in advance. And I can say like that is not the case in the UK with the Bank of England, for example. Sometimes you can be really, really surprised. And I think that's also true in the US. But here, I mean, you can basically write your story about the interest rate cut like 2 weeks before the announcement, which is I don't know. I mean, they're obviously telling people in the press or a few sort of select journalists. But yeah, I mean, well, not just Tiff Macklem, but the whole governing council released a statement where they said they expect inflation to be about 2.5% by later this month, I think.
Yeah,
So
and
that's a tough one because that's up quite a bit. That's an increase of, God, what is that? Like 30% or something like that?
that
25% increase overall. So that's pretty scary. But it's all down to Mr. Trump, of course, who's busy destroying the global economy.
but that is in their target rate, and like the target rate for inflation, is in the 2 to 3% range, and the target rate for the Bank of Canada rate and the U.S. is in the 2% range. That's kind of where they want it. Like they do want, like some level of inflation because that's what helps inflate assets, and that's where you can see that. You look at the chart of the dollar and the U.S. dollar over time, over 100 years, and you can see that there is planned inflation in there.
Yeah, but I feel right now people aren't feeling particularly linked up with the economy. So I don't think people are feeling like their incomes and
Yeah,
whatnot
no.
are increasing by a proportionate amount. And also, let's be honest, it might well be 2.5% when it comes out of Statistics Canada, but I mean that has a very loose relationship with reality as experienced by a consumer. It's more likely to be quite a lot higher than that.
You're bang on right there. Absolutely bang on. And yeah, the Canadians bank don't really have much choice but to cut, though. Our economy is slowing, and that's really the only tool they have to try and stoke investment into businesses and into capital is to lower that interest rate and loosen the money policy. And that's, like with Mark Carney taking the helm, that's kind of his MO is loose money policies. So expect
Yeah,
more of
he
that.
loves inflating assets and overseeing stagnation in living standards. If his time at Bank of England is anything to go by.
If you own a lot of assets, the best thing to do is get a lot of inflation going on. There you go.
Yeah, if you own a lot of assets, send a lot of money to Mark Carney. He'll sort you out.
In the real estate market, just looking at Kelowna here, it is a buyer's market right now. Because they did take the elevator up when they raised interest rates in unprecedented fashion, a 19-fold increase, which didn't really get telegraphed that well when they were jacking them up, when they were doing like full point moves onto the upside. And they're definitely taking the staircase on the way down. And then so it'll be really interesting to see when buyer activity actually starts to come in the market. This is from Colin Krieg, a Remax realtor here in Kelowna that sends out a newsletter, and he's showing that it is a buyer's market in single-family homes, townhomes, and condos. And I did watch a piece on Vancouver right now too. So lots of stuff on the market in Vancouver. Not a lot of sales happening, right? So that will lead to likely some price pressure as well in the near future. So with interest rates coming down, I think you're going to start to see people enter the market, but it'll be interesting to see where they enter the market.
Yeah, I'm reluctant to think that prices will come down much. I feel maybe it's just because of like the generation that I belong to has just been consistently shafted by the housing market. But it just seems to me, if you bought your house for, I don't know, $900,000 or something like that a few years ago, you're not going to want to sell it for much less than maybe 800 or something like that. I mean, even that would be like devastating for most people. And that doesn't, to the average sort of young person that wants to start a family or something, 800 grand, that's like just as unaffordable as 900, really, isn't it? I mean, it's just as much of a mountain to climb. So
Where you'll
I wonder how much difference it'll make.
where you'll see most of the pressure and price pressure is people that are forced to sell, and that might be a job relocation, a divorce, those types of things, a death or something like that. Those are the types where you're going to see, like when there's a requirement of a quicker sale.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the trade stuff, the trade war. Never mind trade stuff, the trade war. Doug Ford says he's sorry, and the cabinet caves. And the cabinet yesterday abruptly agreed to U.S. President Donald Trump's demand that it renegotiate the 2019 trade pact, while Ontario publicly apologized for attempting that 25% surcharge on hydroelectricity for the Great Lakes states. Doug Ford got a lot of attention for sure, though. It was all over American media, though, so he did get attention, I would say, in that respect. What Doug Ford did, it was a good thing because he got a lot of attention in the U.S. They were actually talking about it. I mean, we talk a lot about they don't talk about Canada that much. That got some attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was proud as punch when he came out to do that press conference. He was absolutely delighted with himself
Yeah,
because what he said, his fundamental argument is true, it's correct. Nothing was getting their attention because
yeah,
not only is it a gigantic country with, hundreds of millions of people and all the rest of it, but it's also the center of a global empire. So their news cycle is just full of all sorts of things like Gaza, Ukraine, some random senator somewhere that says something like some bill that they want to pass. It's always like a very congested news cycle. So to break through is
yeah.
hard, and Doug Ford did that. And I actually feel I feel a little bit like uh Blacklocks here, because this is a Blacklock story, isn't it, that you're
Yep,
looking at? I
yep.
feel like that's a little bit disingenuous, actually, that headline and the way that they focused on Ford saying sorry. Like Doug Ford has been saying that since the very beginning. Like I watch a lot of his, but basically all of his speeches, and pretty much every single time he says sorry, but he's not saying sorry. This gives it the impression that he's almost saying sorry to Trump or something like that, but he's
Yeah.
not. He's saying sorry to the American people, and he's saying sorry to his friends in the Great Lakes states. They're all basically friendly to Ontario, as you might expect, because they have to deal with the consequences. So it's a little bit disingenuous. Ford hasn't said sorry to Trump or anything like that. I mean, he's still unhappy with him, obviously, but yeah, I mean, it's a funny one. I do think it's a little bit interesting that it's took Doug Ford, who has no real constitutional role here in international trade, but it's taken Doug Ford, a premier, like, basically like a local government leader. It's taken him to lead on this rather than the federal government. And then he's got this big win. And then the federal government, in the form of Dominic LeBlanc, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll come too. Can I get in
Yeah.
the car?" It's just a bit funny that.
Yeah, with Doug Ford, I mean, you have to give him credit for that. He did say, though, I'm not out to hurt the American people. And he told the governors, I'm not out to hurt them. I apologize to them that we even have to do this. But he also says, like him or not, don't underestimate Donald Trump. He's a smart business person. So, I think even I watched Trump say that he liked Doug Ford, and he said he's smart as well. So there was some kudos back and forth. I think Donald Trump does like strength, and Doug Ford did show some strength, right? He showed some gumption there for sure. And I would add Scott Moe and Danielle Smith into that, the premiers that are actually acting in the best interests of Canada for the most part.
Well, Trump was very complimentary, wasn't he? He called him a very strong man yesterday, and then he also referred to him as a gentleman.
Yeah.
So presumably he was being quite sort of nice and friendly to Howard Lutnick, is it? Because I don't think he spoke to Trump. I think he spoke just to Lutnick. But there seems to be some mixed signals because they said, or Ford said, and Lutnick said that the main topic under discussion is going to be the trade deal, the USMCA or
Yeah.
CUSMA, or however you want to, whichever
Yeah.
acronym you choose to use. That's like they're under the impression that that's the main subject, but then LeBlanc was just did a press conference this morning, like an hour ago or something, and he said that that's not the reason that they're going down there. They're not going to discuss that. They're going to discuss the tariffs. So a bit of mixed signals there. I fancy that the Americans are only going to want to talk about that. They're only going to want to talk about like dairy tariffs and things like that, and it's going to end up being a discussion about that free trade deal, whether or not Dominic LeBlanc thinks that's what it's going to be. So
I'd
it's
imagine
an it's
because
an interesting one.
it's really not Ford's place to be going down there, but I imagine he's the one that likely got the invite for being the tough guy. And then, like Blanc, like you said, says, "Hey, I want in this car too." And now they're trying to pretend that it's them that is coordinating all of this.
Yeah, there's a bit of a kind of like battle of the status or something, isn't there? But I think
Uh,
the reality is, and the federal government are going to have to accept this, whether they like it or not. The reality is that the Liberal Party doesn't really have anybody like Doug Ford. Doug Ford is like a folksy kind of guy. Anybody that's ever seen him speak knows that. He's like he is quite good at he's quite good at speaking to Americans and speaking to like ordinary people. He's not patronizing. He doesn't come across as like an elitist or somebody that thinks he's an expert in anything. He comes across like a kind of ordinary dude, and I think probably the Americans, like Lutnick and the rest, they would much rather deal with somebody like that than like somebody they might perceive as being arrogant, in
yeah, I
like
think
Dominic LeBlanc or Melanie Jolie.
the key to getting stuff done is to speak in simple terms, right? And then Doug Ford does that very well. So does Donald Trump. They speak in very simple terms, and it's like they speak almost like at a grade 5 level, and that's the secret to success for most people. Steve Jobs, those kind of guys, like if you go and take their speeches and put them into like an AI thing, it'll tell you that they speak at about a grade 5 level because that gets through to people, right? You have people like, Michael Ignatieff and even Mark Carney, they speak at this high level, and it seems to speak over people's heads, and a lot of people don't like that. And that's even our news. We try to speak at a very simple level, so it's very easy to understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I think you give the likes of Mark Carney there too much credit because it almost makes it seem like they're like super smart and they understand these really complex ideas. But whereas we said last week, I think it was, Mark Carney was backed into a corner, and he's just an example of many people that do this. But he was backed into a corner with an awkward question by a reporter, and rather than speak simply and clearly, he chose to try and use a lot of terms that, multi-syllable words in an attempt to try and like it's almost like spraying squid ink. It's trying to like confuse your
Yeah.
opponent so you can
It's
run away.
evasion.
And that's exactly what he did. He
Yeah.
just walked away after saying a load of mumbo jumbo. So it's kind of like in many ways actually, I think people that try and speak in a complex way, like in an opaque way, and anybody that's been to university and written essays about a subject that they don't know anything about will know exactly what I'm talking about. I feel like when you do that, it's actually a sign that you don't know what you're talking about. It's a sign that you're struggling and it's defensive almost. And it's, in many cases, actually, it's kind of stupid as well. It's like an indication of a lack of knowledge and a lack of intellect that you can't
Yeah, when,
express yourself clearly.
when somebody starts off and says, first off, let me explain this very clearly to you. So the first point that I want to make in this very clear, and they just kind of go around in circles and spin, and you know you're not going to get an answer. All you're going to get is a bunch of evasion, and they're going to throw a bunch of, like you said, squid ink up, and then not really answer the question, and it just tires people out. But like a lot of people see through it and says, what was the answer to that question? I don't think I got an answer. And I think the Liberal Party has been very good at that. Like Justin Trudeau over the 10 years asked on a multitude of things. His pat answer has always been, we've been there for Canadians when Canadians need us most, and we've given you dental. And it's like, that's not the question, right? But he's gotten away with it with our media because they don't really hold him to account.
Well, unfortunately, they sometimes do the work on his behalf as well. I mean, the Canadian press wrote an article about the tariffs, which we're about to discuss here, and they mentioned the dairy tariff quota system. or the tariff quota system that
Yeah.
affects dairy, among other sectors of the Canadian economy. And they quite clearly, just like I said earlier, they quite clearly didn't know what they were doing. They were like an undergraduate writing an essay about a subject that they don't understand, and they were trying to make it seem like Trump was an idiot and was totally wrong, which he often is. I'm not going to disagree with that, but they were trying to do it without actually explaining what this tariff quota system is. They didn't really explain how it actually works, and they ended up being quite disingenuous. And I see that very often in the press, because obviously in the press, as a journalist, you're supposed to write as though you know what you're talking about, but the subject that you're writing about, you might only have just heard about it like 2 hours earlier, sometimes even less, and you're supposed to go in there and write about this tariff quota system as if you know what it means. And obviously, a lot of journalists in Canada have no idea what that is or how it works.
They'd better have
So
they'd have a better shot at just using OpenAI.
that's the thing. Yeah, I think they give me the impression that they don't use that because that would probably help you. But in the process, obviously, they end up they end up just parroting whatever the government's line is, and the government's line is that, oh, this tariff quota system is totally fair and reasonable, and it's like 99% of products aren't affected and all the rest of it. But it's kind of like, yeah, but how many dairy products or what quantity can we send to Canada before we get slapped with this like 250% tariff? That's something that's not being spelled out because it's awkward to spell that out.
You can find that information very easily. If they had an X account, if they still used X, maybe they could find it there because it's all over the internet. You can find it. They're quite easy. And again, if you use OpenAI or Grok, you can find those answers quite easy too. But Canada imposed a 25% tariffs on about $30 billion U.S. goods on Thursday. That was the tariff that Justin Trudeau proposed a while back there. And that's in retaliation on the tariffs on steel and aluminum that were imposed by the United States.
Yeah, and I've been reading a little bit about this. I mean, I've been reading about because there are only a few producers in the US, and just like with oil and electricity and other things like that, it's really, really difficult to just like click your fingers and increase capacity in this sort of area. Obviously, I mean,
Yep.
anybody that's interested in economics and the real world of business knows that it takes ages to do things like that, to create a new plant to produce aluminium, for example. Like that, it's going to take you a very long time. Then you have to source. I mean, it's just, it's like it's a real schlep. It's a real job. And I was reading about it, and US Steel and the other producers, they've already increased their prices. They're delighted about this. They've been asking for this to happen for ages. They're over the moon. They're not going to increase capacity or production. They're just going to increase prices. So, I mean, how does this help America? Just like a lot of these tariffs, it almost feels like they haven't thought about the immediate consequences. Like, there doesn't seem to be any wisdom to this or any real strategy to this because it's just going to ultimately make things more expensive in the United States, which will ultimately reduce production, industrial production.
And not to be left out, here's the European Union now, as Donald Trump imports tariffs on imports kicks in. They're now going to retaliate as well. Trump's efforts to cause a global war trade seems to have been successful with the European Union, UK, Japan, China, and all those other countries to express fury at the EU said it will hit the US with tariffs on about $28.3 billion worth of goods. And then they're going to keep, on this typical line, we're going to keep all options on the table. And China promised
It's
to
the
take all
British that said that, isn't it? I think,
Yeah.
yeah. The Japanese, they're the interesting ones because the Japanese obviously they don't run their mouth. They don't run their mouths about anything. The Japanese, they're a very sensible sort of
Yeah.
deliberate, calm people in general, at least in politics. And they've come out and said something which tells you, in their own way, they've said it's regrettable. Obviously, that wouldn't mean a lot anywhere else in the world, but for the Japanese to say that, that's like, oh God, I've really offended you then,
They
Japan.
very much couch their opposition to the United States very much so because they do rely on the Americans a lot, especially where they're situated. There's American bases on there, and Japan relies heavily on the Americans. As you know, the Americans take a lot of trade from the Japanese as well.
Yeah, and they also rely on Japan for its, as we said the other day, that they consider Japan, or at least some of them in the United States, consider Japan to be the America's unsinkable aircraft carrier. And
Yeah.
Just look at a map and you'll see exactly what that means because Japan is I mean, it's almost like some sort of ancient Greek god created Japan just to frustrate the Russians and the Chinese because it's like perfectly located to really get into their business and make life hard for those two American enemies.
And here's a tweet from Rupa Subramaniam. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right. But Australia kind of keeping quiet and says it won't retaliate on Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs. And says it amounts to economic self-harm. And that's what, when we interviewed the UBCO economist here in Kelowna, that's what they said too. Just sit back and let the tariffs play out. The Americans will start screaming because it's going to cost them money instead of retaliating. Retaliation is just going to lead to pain for our consumers. And then we also had a summit at the UBCO that we attended, and that's what the message was there to not to retaliate, but like the Australians are saying they're not going to retaliate, the Japanese saying they're not going to retaliate, and as we have Mexico is kind of like sitting there quietly too and letting Canada and the U.S. lob volleys at each other.
Yeah, but I feel like I always have to say it. Rupa hasn't included this context, obviously, because she's, she has her own tree that she's barking up and her own policies that she likes to push. But Australia hasn't been threatened with annexation. You have to remember that. That must be shouted from the rooftops. That has to be the first sentence.
Yeah.
That the United States has repeatedly said that they want to end Canada as a country and make it a state in the United States. Therefore, and I'm sorry, and the president has also very clearly said, talking about saying things clearly, the president has said, I want to weaken Canada to such an extent that I can annex it and make it part of my country. So in that sense, it's a different kettle of fish entirely. That he's not threatening to annex any of these other countries like Mexico and Australia. But also Australia's in a stronger position anyway, number one, because the Americans have a trade surplus with the Australians. So, and obviously Trump's obsessed with that kind of thing. So the Aussies are already in a better position for that reason. And then also Australia is in a very isolated and dangerous neighborhood in the world, and they rely on the United States as their white knight. There is nobody else on earth that can help
Yeah,
them.
they
Nobody else
do.
is going to come to their rescue.
They do rely heavily on the American military might as well, and because China has actually been expanding itself out into that region, and even making some deals with some of the islands there for military bases and so on. So Australia definitely worried as China expands its influence over that Southeast Asia area.
Yeah, and the Chinese not long ago sailed a ship through, I can't remember where it was now, but like a channel. I think it might have been the Tasman Sea or something between Australia and New Zealand, or it might even have been closer to Australia. But they're pushing it down there, and
They're
they also
demonstrating.
have the whip hand over the Australians because they import lots of Australian commodities like
Yeah. Coal.
meat and then coal, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coal, one of the big ones for sure. And then Australians are worried as China shifts from coal, that like they won't have a market to sell their coal to.
Yeah, New Zealand's in a similar spot as well because New Zealand obviously is like an agricultural powerhouse. That's like one of the main parts of their economy, really, and a lot of it goes to China, as you might expect. Because again, get your map out and have a look. New Zealand is almost like pitiably isolated. I always feel sorry for them. They're so isolated, but China is kind of close or closer than any other country really, or any other massive country. So they end up being sucked into the Chinese orbit. And when you do that, when you get in bed with the Chinese, they use it against you at some point. And so, it's you become vulnerable.
Well, the Liberals elected a new leader, Mark Carney, there, and it sounds like he's going to get sworn in on Friday to be Canada's 24th Prime Minister. And there's just like some stuff that he has to do, like logistical stuff to get that clearance, his security clearances and all that stuff, and he will be Canada's next Prime Minister, elected by 150,000 Liberal members.
Online,
Online, yeah.
join free of charge.
the internet poll of the century.
But I will say on this, I still find this completely astonishing that we still don't know when he's going to be prime minister. We still haven't been told. This here, by the end of Friday, this line is from one news agency, which is quoting somebody anonymously, an anonymous source. I
Yeah.
mean, what the hell? What we
And we,
don't even know when we're going to have a new prime minister, and this to me is so strange. This is
yeah,
so weird,
and
and
it
I
doesn't
can't
sound
imagine any other Western country that would do something like this. It's just so unusual.
And it doesn't sound like we're going to get any disclosure either, because now I've heard some people, like fronting for him saying, oh, no, he's going to divest himself of everything by putting it in a blind trust. Well, that's not divesting. That's putting it in a blind trust. And like whenever you start a relationship with somebody, whether that's, like a partner or a marriage or whatever, I think starting with honesty and letting people know what you've been up to is probably a good place to start.
Well, especially when the opposition, whether or not you agree with their point, and I know many people don't, but especially when the main opposition in the party in the country is choosing that line as their sort of main bit of scrutiny of Mark Carney, they've actually gone so far, the Conservatives, as to say that Mark Carney um, might have certain vulnerabilities, certain exposure to the United States, and he might therefore be acting in a way that benefits himself rather than Canada vis-a-vis the trade relationship with the United States. I mean, that's a huge accusation. That's like maybe it's been buried a little bit with all of the insults going back and forth these days, but that's a massive accusation. They're basically saying he's like financially compromised when it comes to the United States. That's huge. So in that context, yes, he really, I think, should be being very transparent and saying, look, no, this is nonsense. I'm not vulnerable to American exploitation or whatever.
It's just weird though that you wouldn't disclose, because you think that would be one of the easiest things to do, especially when you're asking for the trust of Canadian public. Like, just disclose then and just get it over with. Like, what are you hiding?
Yeah, but also kind of say something as well in general. Like, where is he? He's done that. He did about a 25-second corridor interview with some journalists. I think that was yesterday, was that? Or was that Monday? I
Yeah,
mean, you're about to be our prime minister. You basically are our prime minister now during an extremely frightening time for Canadians, like a really sketchy time in Canadian history. So, get your face out there.
interesting, right? Um,
Indeed.
we talked about this yesterday. Stephen Guilbeault, the environment minister, he says that 19% fuel tax hike not likely to happen on April 1st. No surprise there. And even, British Columbia saying they're likely going to remove that consumer carbon tax. Um, but, the questions they were asking is like, so how is this going to get done without Parliament in session? And they said they have ways. They have ways. Always they have ways, right? Why not just let Parliament resume? That'd be the normal way, right?
Indeed, that is how this democracy is supposed to function, isn't it? Not
Yeah.
through like executive order, basically executive decisions on the sidelines. Everything is supposed to be scrutinized by Parliament because that is, we've had this conversation loads of times, but like that is how historically, that is how we got people to stop killing each other over politics because we said, you can elect somebody where you live. You can choose to vote for somebody where you live, and then that person will go and represent you in the capital city in Parliament, and he will scrutin or she will scrutinize everything the government does, and therefore your voice is heard. You don't have to go and get on your horse and start hacking people to bits with a sword. Like just vote instead. And yet here we are. Parliament has just been completely sidelined in a crazy prorogation. I mean, I know prorogation is always controversial, and it was controversial when Trudeau did it last time, which I think was during the We charity scandal, wasn't it? Controversial when it's been done in the past by conservatives as well. But this is a whole new level, isn't it? This is proroguing Parliament so that you can have a leadership election within your party during probably one of the main or the two worst and scariest events in Canadian history since the Second World War. I mean, that's another level.
It's very selfish, and a lot of people have pointed that out. And it just seems that like it's selfish on another level, really, right?
Well, it's kind of when I say that, when I say about the two worst or the two scariest moments in Canadian history, the other one is probably when it was all kicking off in Quebec, I would say, and they were like, when there was somebody was kidnapped, weren't they? And they were kind of it was a really frightening time in Canadian history when the Quebec separatists decided to, or some of them decided to turn to violence. I mean, can you imagine a sort of an extended prorogation of Parliament during that period? I just, or even any other sort of national crisis that Canada's experienced, you just wouldn't expect that, would you? And if it was the Conservative Party in charge, I sense that the Liberals and the NDP and the rest of them would be possibly camped out now in front of Parliament with a permanent protest.
Wow. And then he's named, and Mark Carney's named two people that Trudeau actually got rid of. And so he's brought them back. And one is his chief of staff, Marco Mendicino.
Mendocino, I believe.
Mendicino, there you go. He brought him back as chief of staff. And, like Trudeau didn't get rid of a lot of people, but that was one of them. And David Lametti. Interesting.
Lametti was his Mark Carney and David Lametti were co-captains of the Oxford University hockey team. Just to give you another hilarious taste of how ridiculously insular and interbred the Canadian elite really is. They all know each other. They're all friends going back years. It's so, so strange.
And these two were the ones sharing texts for the Freedom Convoy about, like really amping up the way to quell the protest. That's a nice way of saying it, right?
Yeah, and that's presumably going to be a feature of this election, at least to some extent, because the Liberals have tried on numerous occasions to negatively associate Pierre Poilievre with that, because Poilievre was, he was somewhat sympathetic to the idea, wasn't he? And he sort of went out there and gave them Timmies or something like that once, didn't he? So they've been trying to associate him with that in a negative way, but Pierre might actually try and flip the table there and associate them with that in a negative way.
Well, bringing back those two guys really seems odd, right? Because I think that is a black mark in Canadian history, like that day, like when it could have all been solved by going out there and talking to them, which Trudeau refused to do. But then he's made countless speeches of how people have a freedom of expression, that he would always talk to people, well, except that group, apparently.
Well, and he also he really did spell it out. This show that we're doing here is all about people who've spelled it out clearly, isn't it? And he spelled it out very clearly then, because he said, "No, I'll never speak to them." And then he used a straw man argument and tried to associate them all with a couple of bad actors, didn't they? Or
Yeah.
didn't he rather?
Yeah.
And then not long after that, I believe it was, or maybe it was even before that. I can't remember the exact timeline, but he went out to a Black Lives Matter protest, which was not strictly speaking within the guidelines of public health officials. He went out there and protested with the Black Lives Matter people, and then he was interviewed saying, "Why'd you do that? That wasn't very good with it being COVID and everything." And he said, "Because I agree with this protest, so I'm going to go out, but I don't agree with the Ottawa truckers protest." So I guess it was after, because it was like it was obviously he was contradicting himself in a pretty sort of shocking way, but he very clearly said it's like he agreed with that, and if he agrees with the protest, he'll break the rules.
So polls, and we're seeing a lot of polls being pushed out there by different people. And this one here has the Liberals with a massive majority. And then, this is an Ecos poll. Look at that, eh? And then there's another poll from Innovative Research, and that shows that the Conservatives have a majority. So I don't know.
But yeah, like let's look at that poll. You can just about see. I don't know if Rommel can go back to the map there.
Go
You
back
can
to
just
the,
about see. Look at the BC interior, all nicely red.
yeah.
Something tells me, and I'm sure you feel the same, since we actually know about this part of Canada, that there's almost zero chance of that happening. It's complete nonsense.
Yeah. Well, according to them, the only two provinces, the ones that well, the one province really that they absolutely villainize all the time is Alberta. It's the only one that they've haven't managed to paint red in this poll.
Yeah. Although they do have Calgary, Edmonton there, a few. That would be more seats than they presently have in Alberta.
Yeah. And then there's this innovative research poll um, showing something different. We look at polymarkets, and polymarkets definitely have showed the Liberals gaining, but not to the amount that this Ecos poll. And then somebody put out there that the Ecos has been receiving money from the government as well. So who knows, right?
I mean, yeah, right now nobody knows. I think it's Nanos or Leger, one of the sort of big boys. They've just come out as well with a poll today, which has them exactly even, the Tories and the Liberals. If that was accurate, that would mean that the Liberals would be in government, obviously, because they would just do another deal with their friends,
Yeah.
the NDP. But I don't know. I think right now, I think the reality is so much has changed and is changing, and it's happening so quickly that I don't think polls are able to figure it out yet because it's
No,
changing too rapidly.
I,
It's
I
too up in the air right now.
I would agree. I mean, those types of swings don't typically happen like that fast, right? So, um, and I look at too at the audience is that the coronation for the liberal leadership there. Um, Pierre Poilievre got more people out at one of his regular events on the same night. So, you know, so there's
Yeah,
that.
and usually people that would be you would think that was like easy to dismiss that argument, but the exact same argument was made in the US not so long ago when people were saying like nobody really is going to these Kamala Harris events. Like I don't and whereas every like Trump goes to some town in Pennsylvania and like the whole city or the whole town turns up. So it's like a lot of people
Well,
dismissed that as an argument because they were like, that's not how elections work. But in the end, it turned out that actually the enthusiasm and the energy really was around Trump, and he won, and more people did come out for him.
Well, Kamala Harris did have a workaround there, and let's watch and see if that happens with the Liberals, where they started offering, like, Beyonce and up in the, different people that say, thinking that, like, kind of misleading them, saying you're going to get a free concert from Beyonce, and like, place was packed, and Beyonce obviously didn't perform, and even to the point where she went on some talk shows and paid them to be on those shows, like Oprah Winfrey and that.
Yeah, well, Trudeau paid to be on a podcast, didn't he, not so long ago, that about 15 people watched.
Yeah,
So I'm saying that there's a good chance that that sort of thing will happen. But I
good.
don't know about any musical acts that would perform sort of like for the Liberals. In America, obviously, every artist, every musician basically is a Democrat. It's just the way that it works there with a two-party system. But
Well,
in
not
Canada,
every. Hey,
I don't know if there are people that would come out and be like, "I'm a liberal." It's like that's not exactly something that people do here.
not everyone. I mean, I've been accused of looking like Kid Rock. I'm not sure how I look like Kid Rock, but there you go. Kid Rock definitely not in that genre with what you just said, but yeah, the majority for sure would be there. And then I think it was Carrie Underwood that got beat up really bad for singing the national anthem at one of his events, or I think the
It
inauguration.
was the inauguration.
She's got a big lawsuit against the View for that. Anyway, this is closer to your hometown there. Government polls, and this is another Holly Doan's Blacklock story. Government polls, urban crime fear. Lots of gun crime there in the city of Toronto, right? Urban crime so alarming, householders say they may start to arm themselves. And that was a pre-election Privy Council research saying that, gun crime in Toronto alone resulted in 119 injuries and 32 deaths since 2021. So there you go. And it's not the lawfully licensed hunters and sports things. And they're blaming a lot of that gun crime on what you talked about before is cross-border gun smuggling. And they say we need to fix the border for fentanyl, and we say you need to fix the border for guns. And I think that the answer to that is let's fix the border.
Yeah, and let's not be gigantic hypocrites talking garbage like the Americans, because that doesn't really help anybody. But I would say about this gun thing in Toronto, especially, it's funny that this story's come out, or not funny, actually quite tragic, because it was just, I think it was at the weekend, just gone, that I can't remember the exact number, but I think about 13 people ended up being shot in a pub in Toronto.
Yeah.
after some like masked gunmen came in and started firing rifles and all sorts of things just into a random crowd of people in a pub. So, I mean, that is just so weird, and I was quite surprised actually that that didn't really become sort of major national news, but that's just insane, obviously. I mean, clearly there's a shooting problem in Toronto.
Yeah. And then closer to home here in British Columbia, the minister of BC says that Josie Osborne says that now is the time to go after healthcare workers in the United States to take advantage of that U.S. chaos down there to attract more doctors and nurses to BC. I'm not sure how they're going to do it. Like you and I did that story a while back where the BC government spent a lot of money advertising in the UK to get doctors. We're going to try and figure out how many doctors we actually got and how much money we spent. We're going to send out some FOIs and that. We're working on that story right now. So it'd be interesting to see the amount of money that we spent in the UK and what we actually got for it.
It would be. It would be very interesting, wouldn't it? And unlike with the US, Canada has a huge amount of advantages over Britain, where they don't their pay is not very high in Britain. They lack a lot of things that like the houses are smaller and stuff like that. You could argue the quality of life is crapper in England. That's not true with the US, where the health workers earn in some cases double or triple what they earn in Canada, and obviously their houses are just as big and all the rest of it. Their gas is cheaper, so it's a
Food's
harder
cheaper,
sell, I
gas
think.
cheaper, food cheaper, everything cheaper. And we have to remember too, them coming here would almost be like a 40% pay cut, just even if the wages were at parity, just because of our dollar.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And I mean, and then that's before you talk about like intangible things like maybe the weather, for example. Like, I think it would be quite a tricky one to try and seduce somebody out of like Utah, Arizona, or something like that, where
I
they
think
get
what
4,000 hours of sun a year.
they're going to work on, I think, and I'm not sure how you know successful it'll be. They're going to work on soft metrics, being like, oh, in Canada you don't have to worry about your right to choose, Donald Trump, and different things. Really soft metrics as opposed to the hard metrics where people have to feed their families. So I'm just
Yeah, I
still.
think it's about politics mostly, isn't it? They're trying to say that they're trying to cash in on the um the definitely real sort of hostility and fear that a lot of Americans have now because of the Trump being in power. But
And I can.
this happens every time. I can remember this during the George W. Bush time, like especially when he won his second term.
Right.
I can remember all this fuss about like, oh, Canadians are just gonna like millions of Americans are just gonna go and move to Canada.
Yeah.
Obviously, that didn't
Yeah, there
happen,
was
and it never happens.
there was move to Canada parties. I remember that back then, but nobody actually ended up moving to Canada because they looked over across the border and they're just like, "Is there snow over there?" So I think this is more of a political play by the NDP because, like the closures going on in Merritt and Lillooet and that they're still ongoing, and they got to look like they're doing something, and they're doing very little to attract more doctors and nurses here into British Columbia. And this looks like doing something, but how effective it will be, I would, if I was betting on the poly markets there, I would probably put money on the not very effective.
It speaks of a little bit of desperation, doesn't it, as well? I think like if you look underneath the press release and you kind of think about it, it suggests that they're panicking a little bit and they don't really have any ideas.
I mean, they have a better chance of attracting people out of the Philippines and out of, like other countries, Mexico and stuff like that, as opposed to the United States, where they make more money and they would take like again, we have to realize they would take a 40% pay cut. When it was, I think I was in my late 20s and I was offered a job as an accountant to go to Texas at the time and to work for this multinational company. And it was good money, really good money. And I went down there for a week. They wanted me to make sure that I wanted to do was in Houston. And they wanted to make sure that, I was going to move my family down there. And Nikki couldn't work at that time because under NAFTA, I could work as an accountant, but she couldn't work. But the biggest thing that our decision-making process was like we would have lost basically at that time the dollar was pretty bad too. We would have lost half of our stuff. Like the price of homes was about the same, but we would have lost like 40% just on exchanging that, and then just the price of food was that much, and so we decided at that point not to go. I don't know whether that was a good idea or a bad idea later on, but
Well, your kids would have had Texas accents. How would you feel about that?
well, Nikki went to school in Texas, and that was like kind of the attraction for Texas. But
But she
yeah,
doesn't have a
no,
Texan accent. You got to bear in mind that you'd have the accent like, "Hey, Dad."
I'd have to work on the accent. Yeah, I'd have to work on the accent. But Houston's a major city, major size city. Like it's crazy how big that city was. Anyway, that was a long time ago.
That's the sort of space city, isn't it?
Yeah. The home of a lot of companies now that have moved to Texas. Lots of people moving to Texas. I could have been there first. The New York Post, a center-right party wins most votes in Greenland. So there you go. Does that play into Donald Trump's hands
I love how they've used a picture of somebody casting
with a
their
MAGA
ballot
hat?
with a MAGA hat on there.
That's right.
Probably the only guy. Um, yeah, well, the party that's won, the majority of the parties in this election wanted independence, but the party that's won has said that they want to get there gradually, whatever that means. They want to try and strengthen the, I guess, like the state, you could say, but also the economy, so that they're more resilient when they do declare independence from Denmark. But as we've said a couple of times, the very notion of an independent Greenland is just simply preposterous, and it will never happen. I mean, I would bet my kidneys on that. It's not going to happen because it's just not realistic for an island that big, that important, in terms of its geography, but also its natural resources. For that to just float around as an independent country with 50,000 people, it's just, and like no military, obviously, it's just ludicrous. The Americans will never allow that to happen. And if they did, then the Chinese or someone else would just take it. So, I mean, it's all a bit silly, really, I think this.
Yeah, it's a developing situation, so it'll be interesting to see because right now it is under Denmark's kind of control, and we'll see how it plays out. But like around the world, we've seen a lot more governments switch to the right side of the ledger, I guess. In some of the left-leaning media would call it the far right extreme, but I mean the right side of the ledger is a more fair way to say it. And um, we've seen that in many countries across the world, and Greenland no exception right now.
Yeah, the Germans just went to the conservatives, or they call themselves conservatives. Their enemies say that they're just liberals, but the Germans did it. Most people seem to think the French are going to do it as well when they have their election
But there's
soonish.
there's
And
lots of
then I guess there's Canada. Maybe Canada will too.
there's lots of chatter on the internet that like the globalists will fight hard to hang on to Canada. That'll be kind of one of the last places that they can hang on to. And we have a self-proclaimed global elitist. He said himself that he's a global elitist, and that has been part of a lot of these globalist things. So it's going to be a heck of a fight to take pry Canada out of that left-leaning media or election there.
Well, Canada, I would say, you're saying it's deemed like they don't want to lose it, basically. That's kind of what you said,
Yeah.
isn't it? I would say Canada is probably of the world's like serious countries, like big countries, real countries. I'd say Canada is the most liberal country in the world. I mean, in terms of its population, I'd say that I can't think of a rival really. I mean, you could maybe put the Germans forward, but it's different in Germany. It's not like they're liberals. They're cursed by their own history and they're sort of weird kind of masochists. That's not the same as liberalism.
Apologists, I think, would be a good word for them.
Yeah, but Canada is like if the Democratic Party had an entire country forever, sort of thing. It is a very liberal country. So I guess from that perspective, if they lost, if the internationalist liberal community, if you want to use that word, if they lost Canada, I think that would be felt as like a real horrible defeat, a real body blow.
Yeah, and then let's talk about accountability and transparency. And this is this Doge thing that's caused a lot of grief down in the United States. And here's on a CNN. We're going to run this clip first.
Well, I can tell you what the nonpartisan GAO has identified, and we had a hearing on this earlier today. They've identified what they believe to be about $500 billion just in fraudulent payments across the federal government. That's Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. This is not payments that are legitimately going to people who deserve it and actually should be getting this money. This is fraud. They've identified on top of that $161 billion just last year in what they believe to be improper payments. So there's an enormous amount of waste, fraud, and abuse in our federal government. That's why the DOGE work that they're doing is so important. You know, for decades, Congress has been trying to figure out what's going on at the executive branch where they're spending and doling out all of this money. And finally, we're getting some answers, and I think that the American people are shocked by it. And, you know, I think in the coming months, you're going to see some action from Congress to get rid of this as well.
So that has become such a hot topic in the United States, that Doge thing, that they're actually like, you know, firebombing Tesla dealerships and shooting them up and all kinds of things because, you know, like Elon Musk is leading this effort. Alex Karp of Palantir, the CEO, said that the only person that could do this type of work is Elon Musk because of AI and the team of software engineers he's using, because nobody else could sift through that data. But Donald Trump, in his front lawn speech yesterday, where they had Tesla out there, said that they're going to deem these people attacking American companies as terrorists. So interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I would say it's not. Elon isn't on Tesla, and Elon aren't being targeted just because of Doge. I would say that's probably quite far down the list of reasons why he's being targeted. He's being targeted because of rather inflammatory things that he said about a number of topics, including Ukraine and NATO and et cetera, et cetera. So I think Elon is, before Doge, had become a figure of real hatred. And because he's so powerful and he's so like ubiquitous, he's all over the place all the time. I think it helps for these extremists and violent types to concentrate on him because he's just always there and he's such a big figure. But I think it definitely predates Doge, though that I'm sure hasn't helped.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure
mean,
that hasn't increased Elon's personal
yeah,
safety. Let's put it that way.
none of this stuff has happened till recently, though. I mean, it's just amped up in the past little while here. The new four-lane highway cutting through tens of thousands of acres of protected rainforest so that they can get the COP30 climate summit going in the Brazilian city of Belém. There you go. Again, a little bit of hypocrisy going on, right?
Well, it's a funny one, isn't it? It's similar to the people that fly in their own private jets, or they sail across the world in a giant diesel super yacht to go to a climate conference, where they say, everybody, you've got to start taking this really seriously, or the earth will spontaneously combust, and we're all going to die in fire, sort of thing. It's kind of like there is a point where if your argument is that extreme and that scary, that you have to kind of live your own principles. And, you know, say what you want about Greta Thunberg, who is obviously a total extremist, kind of in many ways, not just on the climate. But at least she tried in her own sort of like hopeless, naive way. She's tried to live by her own principles when she got on that sailboat to go to New York, I think it was. It's like at least she attempted to live by her own sort of prescriptions. But the people that go to COP and you know, whatever else, all these climate summits, people like Leonardo DiCaprio, he's like probably the most famous hypocrite in this department. They never live by their own principles. They're constantly flying around and they're constantly doing things like this, driving on highways that have just been built specifically for them to go and complain about the world ending. I mean, it's they really don't add any strength to their arguments, I don't think. They just make a mockery of it all.
Well, I mean, the same thing here with the carbon tax when there was opposition to it, and they said that, you know, like this has to happen. There's no other way that, and, you know, Canadians get, I think Brent was saying, and Canadians get eight out of 10 Canadians benefit from the carbon tax. And, you know, like that couldn't be further from the truth, because the reality of it is it's a compounding carbon tax that is basically, you know, destroyed the economy of Canada and impoverished many people and increased we have record numbers in the food bank lineups and all that stuff. instead of playing our biggest strength, energy, and having a sovereign wealth fund like the Norwegians, we are, like the falling GDP per capita, and the disparity between Canada and the United States continues to grow wider and wider and wider.
Yeah, but the carbon tax thing, it's almost like it's like the liberal version of Trump's tariffs, isn't it? It's like red meat for gullible partisans who are on your side. So Trudeau comes out and says, if you've got a swimming pool and 3 SUVs, then you're not going to get the carbon tax. But if you're an average, jolly good Canadian, then you're going to benefit from this. Trying to divide people and also coming out with absolute nonsense because it's not true, because it doesn't consider the second order effects, like businesses having to get rid of workers and things like that because they can't afford the carbon tax. None of that is factored in, but the gullible go along with it, and the manipulative figure in the party loves to say that. And then on the other side, you've got Trump saying these tariffs are great, they're going to bring in billions of dollars, and then doesn't mention how it's also going to kill productivity, and it's going to, a lot of companies are going to have to shut down because they can't operate anymore, and so on, and the second order effects. We live in a time where there just seem to be like legions of gullible people that will go along with any old garbage that a politician offers them.
Some of them go to a certain website and they get their message for the day, and then they, like sheep, then they go out and scream that message to the public. You're not going to get that here.
Unfortunately, that's the world we're in.
So, let's move on to markets. Gold, again, like loving that 2,900 number, and then looking to challenge 3,000. And, it looks like it's going to take a run at 3,000. That'll be a tough wall to break for sure. And that's why we're seeing a lot of activity here as it chops along here. Like 3,000 being a psychological barrier for sure for gold. And a lot of financial people are calling for it to go over. But it'll be a tough one for sure.
Get your pickaxe out and head to the Yukon.
Yeah, there's gold out there. There's gold in them thar hills. Isn't that how it was said? Gold in them thar hills, right?
Yeah.
According to some people, there's gold in asteroids. So you just got to get yourself a SpaceX rocket, and you can head up there and get some. Because that gold
That's
sinks.
Elon's plan, I guess.
Gold sinks to when it's all molten, gold sinks to the core. So one of the heaviest, I think it is the heaviest metal. So you can look for it at the core of any planet if you can figure out a way to get there. Bitcoin, chopping along, 80,000, filling that gap there though. So, it looks like it might want to go back up now, right? I think, like it's had this kind of like this reset period. So there's an opportunity there. So for the people that are brave enough to jump in there, but there you go. Canadian dollar. Not a happy camper still. I think, an election will really tell the difference of where this Canadian dollar goes. I think if we get a resource-friendly leadership, like a really resource-friendly leadership where they're going to cut regulation and fast-track projects and all that kind of stuff and tap the number one resource. And we should almost have like where people jump in there and say, what is the number one resource in Canada? Does anybody know?
It should be on the money, shouldn't it? It should be on the notes, just like an oil slick.
It's just like it's energy. Like it's energy. It's all about energy. And unless we get a government that's favorable for energy, we could see a really good bounce in the Canadian dollar if we get a government that is very favorable to our number one asset, energy. And here you go. And we're going to play this clip from Jeff Bezos, one of the world's richest guys. And let's play this clip here.
Because the stock is not the company, and the company is not the stock. And so as I watched the stock fall from 113 to 6, I was also watching all of our internal business metrics, number of customers, profit per unit, everything you can imagine, defects, etc. Every single thing about the business was getting better and fast. And so as the stock price was going the wrong way, everything inside the company was going the right way. And we didn't need to go back to the capital markets. We didn't need more money. The only reason, a financial bust like the internet bubble bursting makes it really hard to raise money. But, we already had the money we needed. So we just needed to continue to progress.
There you go. One of the things that just as a tip there for people, or a thought, most money is made by contrarians that go against the market where the whole market is swimming. So it's contrarians that make market. When there's blood in the streets, have the courage of a lion. But if you act like sheep, you're definitely likely to get fleeced. How's that?
That's certainly what Warren Buffett was famous for, wasn't it? Going against the grain.
So when you see things happening, when you see a company lose half its market cap because of factors other than to do, this is what the point is, other than factors that have to do with the actual company metrics, you might look at that as a huge buying opportunity and be a contrarian, or, you know, like, or you could be a sheep. Because if you just watch these shows, these financial shows, they'll tell you about stuff after it's happened. You know, they were saying Palantir was a terrible buy when it was $25, but it's an amazing buy at $100, right? So, you know, like by that time, you know, when everybody's screaming buy, you should be probably, you know, saying bye-bye as opposed to buying, right? So one of the things I'm trying to teach my kids and people that I know is that there's a really good app out there in Canada now. It's something similar to the Americans' Robinhood, where you can take, if you're going to buy that coffee, that $9 sugar-induced coffee that's no good for you, you can actually instead take that $9 and buy a fractional share in any company that you like, and for no commission. Because prior to this, like let's take you know, one of the big banks, even if they had low commissions in, like, say, $7, you couldn't buy $10 worth of stock and then you'd have to pay the commission in and out. So you'd have to make $30. Like, stock would have to go to $30 before you could break even. But with commission-free trading, you can buy a fractional share for $10, and then if it goes up, you get the difference and you sell it, right? Like, so that is one huge opportunity for especially younger investors, right? Because if you're buying a large amount of shares, you know, that $7 commission doesn't really make much of a difference. But if you're buying $10 worth, $20 worth, $30 worth, and making choices of, you know, not going out for dinner instead of investing that into the market, you're going to find that it starts to make sense, and plus you get to learn. Like, if you happen to have a famous brand that you like to wear, maybe it's Lululemon, why not become a shareholder of Lululemon? Maybe next time, instead of buying that $100 shirt at Lululemon, put that $100 into Lulu stock. Or whatever you like. If you want to buy Ford, GM, Tesla, it doesn't matter what you want to buy. There's tons of stock. Apple, Microsoft. You can buy all these stocks through this Wealthsimple. And we're actually going to share a link there that we'll put it in the notes. So you can put that link up there too if you can. People can see that link there. No, the link, it's in the notes there. You'll find it. And then if you use that link, you'll get $25 to when you open your account. So. And I think you've used that, haven't you, Ian? You have an account now?
Yeah, I did use it. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Robinhood, because I think a lot of people probably can remember that hilarious news story from a few years back when everybody went in on GameStop, and it was all
Yeah.
people using Robinhood, and they were making loads of money on GameStop, which was like a pretty sort of crap stock, wasn't it? But they just they did it as a joke. It was like they called it a meme stock. And
Yeah.
I can remember that happening, and I remember being a bit jealous because it was like we didn't have access to Robinhood here. We didn't really have anything. We couldn't get in and have a laugh.
Yeah.
But now with this Wealthsimple, and there are other ones actually. There's a couple other ones. I think Scotiabank has one. But I mean, Wealthsimple is the closest, I think, analog to Robinhood. So it's good to have it. It's good to be able to just to do this without having to go through
Well, I'm going to stick it
a
in the
stockbroker.
comments. Rommel's having some trouble getting it in there, but we'll put it in the story too. But I stuck it in the comments there too, right? So for people, if you want it, I stuck it in the YouTube comments there. And then, like I said, if you use that link, you'll get $25 when you open your account. And it's actually a great tool for your kids too, to teach them about financing. Because the best employee you'll ever have is the dollars that you worked for, and that dollar worked for you all the time, right? So, and it's a good skill to learn. They don't teach enough of that in school, and we're going to try and add that in some of our news shows here, because like we want to add some value to what's going on for sure. And then with that said, we're going to move on to our AI and tech kind of like segment. I think we covered this a little bit before. AI is coming to McDonald's near you, so they're going to use it in the drive-thru. So you get voice recognition technology will be implemented to aim to improve order accuracy. And in some places, they're even going to use facial recognition. Look at that, hey? and they can speak multiple languages as well. So if you have trouble with a certain language, you're going to get an AI robot that speaks in your language.
I like the idea of facial recognition. Is it going to come out and say, "You look like you need McChicken,"
Or it
based
might
on your
say,
facial gestures?
or it might say, Ian, I don't know. Like, we're not going to get you those fries. We're gonna give you a salad instead.
Your face looks a little bit too round today. We're not
Right.
going to give you that.
Today's a salad day for you. In our EV section, there we go. We got Northvolt, the Swedish battery maker, filed for bankruptcy. So that effectively ends Europe's best hope for developing a rival major to the EV battery plants. So the Chinese definitely own that battery market. Other than Tesla, it's the Chinese that are making all these batteries that like the other legacy automakers are using. The Chinese definitely dominating the auto market, right? I mean, they're now building half of the automobiles for the world, and the largest auto market in the world is China. That is one large auto market, and over half the sales in China are EVs. So there you
It's
go.
a funny one, isn't it, China? I mean, we definitely don't have time to go into the detail of the Chinese economy, but they're obviously world famous for pumping their industries full of capital. So it's not I mean, the Europeans do that a little bit, but I mean, how do you win a battle against China? You know, they prop up their own industries like mad. They fill them full of their own capital, and it's a very like unfair battle, I think. And the Europeans, they're on a downgrade anyway in general, but they can't hope to compete with that from the Chinese state.
There you go. And then we have Jesse Waters. He runs he's got a show on Fox there. He says, he's just making fun of the liberals. He said EVs were going to save the planet. Now they're lighting them on fire. And then this is where we're going to talk about Donald Trump saying they're going to make them designate them terrorists, the ones that are going after it. And then a lot of people are getting mad that Donald Trump had Teslas in the front yard there of the White House, and then there's some pictures back there when Joe Biden had Ford, GM, and Jeep in the front yard, and didn't invite Tesla to the biggest EV summit in the world, and they didn't invite the largest EV maker at the time. So
I mean, as well, Joe, just to like underline that, Joe Biden during his presidency went
next
to
slide
bat
there.
for those big three automakers.
Yeah.
It felt to me like almost every single day they were
Yeah.
obsessed. And then so was Barack Obama, who obviously famously propped up GM when it was going to go under. So like it is a little bit rich to see people complain about a president showing favor to a car company.
Yeah, and they called it the biggest EV summit. And they actually had GM's Mary Barra stand up there, and Joe Biden said at the time that Mary Barra is leading the EV charge. How's that for words? EV charge in America, and she stood there and took it. She took the praise. That could have been our meme for today, but we got a couple other memes from the Babylon today. We're just going to wrap things up here. We've got a couple minutes left. The FDA recommends 6 to 11 servings of microplastics every day for growing children. Microplastics becoming a really thing of concern for a lot of parents. Like they're seeing all this plastics that they're finding it in autopsies, and that all these microplastics that are inside that we're ingesting. Who doesn't want
Yeah, and it's bringing down testosterone levels and fertility levels as well, isn't it? Which is a bit scary.
Microplastics. There you go. And then this is one I related to. This is a funny one. Like that Worcestershire bottle, probably passed down through 7 generations. Like, it's that one bottle of sauce that you have in the fridge that nobody ever uses, and then you don't think it ever goes bad. I don't know if you have one of those bottles. I have that bottle in my fridge, and I don't know how old that is.
I've definitely got a bottle of Worcestershire sauce in my fridge. Being true born Englishman, you got to have that. I'd recommend to people stick it on a grilled cheese. If you want to just get rid of it, you want to use it, put it on a grilled cheese. Very nice.
I put it in barbecue sauce every now when I'm kind of making barbecue sauce, my own barbecue sauce. I put it in there, but I have no other reason. Like I've never tried it in grilled cheese. So like, what's the flavor that's added? I just put it into the barbecue sauce because I'm just trying to get rid of it.
It's almost like it's a nice spicy sort of vinegary taste. It's very nice, but it's used in a lot of sauces as well. Like you know, for a pasta sauce or something like that. It's often an ingredient in those, and it really does add something quite nice.
There you go. If you nothing else today, we got you the Wealthsimple app. We're going to put in the comments, and then we got you some uses for the what's the sauce called? I know I'm going to mess that up.
Worcestershire.
Worcestershire. There you go. Worcestershire sauce.
Yeah.
Don't buy a large bottle if you're out in the store, because it's going to last forever, right? You'll be passing it down to like the great grandchildren.
Yeah, don't get the Magnum bottle.
Yeah, don't go to Costco and buy like the jug. Unless you're going to eat a lot of grilled cheese. Like I said, we're going to try and make sure you get something of value out of every show, and we hope that helps. Again, the Wealthsimple one is something just to take a look at, right? So again, you're trading, even if the stock goes down loses half its value, and instead of buying that $9 sugar coffee, you'll be better off, because once you drink that sugar coffee, not only are you harming your health, it's all gone. And whereas even the stock, you'll have half of it left. And at least you can walk into Lululemon and say, hey, I own this place.
Treat me with some respect.
They might kick you out, but hey, they're pretty nice at Lululemon. They'll never kick you out. But unless you start ordering them around and asking them what shifts they're working and how we can, maybe start to doge them or something. But that's our show for today. That's our show for today. We're back tomorrow. We were a little early today because we have a whole bunch of shows that we're doing. We're in a couple of live streams here right after this. So I'm Jim Check, and I'm with here Ian Burns with KelownaNow.com. We ask you to subscribe, comment, do all those great things. And we're back here tomorrow morning with a really big show. Thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent.